you know, my name is Moroni Westerlund. I have worked in banking for the last 42 years plus. I also have been working in the church for, well, been serving in various callings in the church, including being a branch president and a bishop and stake president. I share those with you just to give you some background to the fact that I have opportunities both in my work and at church to talk to people about finance. That's one of the big life challenges that people have. And so what I'd like to do today is share with you some of the insights that I've gained over those years. You'll see my screen, and I'm talking about a path to financial health. It's something that I have thought of, observed, and pulled together over these years of discussing it with people and listening to their frustrations and listening to some of the success stories that people have had. So I'll just launch into it, if that's okay. And if you have any questions, just type them in. So there's a few truths that I want to get across, but let's start with a quote. Now, this is a quote from the Lord, and I tell people that when I pull this together, the template that I used said, put in a quote from somebody that helps you to understand what it is that you want to achieve. And so I thought, if I can quote the Lord, I'm in good hands, or we're all in good hands. He says in Doctrine and Covenants, it is my purpose to provide for my saints. He makes it quite clear that despite the challenges that we face, his intent is always to help us to provide for ourselves and provide for our families. And so that's a statement of fact, a statement of faith, a statement that fills me with personal confidence as I face the challenges of life. That if only I can understand what the Lord wants me to do, I think all will be well. There's another truth that I want to also establish in the beginning. I have a few favorite scriptures. This is one of my many favorite scriptures. And again, I will give unto you a pattern in all things, that ye may not be deceived. For Satan is abroad in the land, and he goeth forth deceiving the nations. I've seen at work, in my responsibilities, I have seen how people have been tricked into losing money, giving money away, giving people access to their accounts. There is a lot of people who are out there who are willing to deceive us, not just when it comes to banking and accounts, but also when it comes to things like buying things. How much does it cost us to buy a car? How much does it cost us to buy clothes? And it's important for us to understand that the Lord has established patterns, that if we but see them, they will protect us and help us to choose the right, for want of a better description. There's another concept I want to introduce as part of this sort of introduction piece. Another one of my favorite passages of scriptures is found in Doctrine and Covenants, section 130. There is a law irrevocably decreed in heaven before the foundations of this world, upon which all blessings are predicated. The key words for that for me is the words irrevocable and predicated. So there is a law that is irrevocably decreed. This law was established before the world was organized, and it can't be revoked. It is in place, and it was in place, and it will always be in place. And it tells us that there are blessings that are linked to laws. And then verse 21, and when we obtain any blessing from God, it is by obedience to that law upon which it is predicated. If we understand that, if we understand the blessings that we want and understand the linkage between that and the law, and then if we live that law, the Lord promises us the blessing. So you follow the connections. So we understand there are patterns in what the Lord has taught us. If we can see those patterns, it will help us. And this is one of the strongest patterns that is out there, understanding that every blessing we get is linked to obedience to some law. If we want to be more healthy, try just sitting at home watching TV and see how healthy you become. We're not obeying the law. It's pretty hard to become healthy that way, or eat fast food all the time. The law of finance is the same. We need to understand the laws that relate to finance so that we can obey them to receive the blessings that we want to achieve. So with that in mind, I'm going to begin with the first pattern that I'd like to propose. First things first. For many people, we all have different priorities. But the Lord's promised us some things. He said that if we pay tithes, he opens up the windows of heaven. It's a simple process, but it's one that is challenging for us to follow, and in some ways it's counterintuitive. We're saying, if I've got 100% of my money and I give away 10%, I'll be better off. And yet that's what the Lord is telling us, that we will be better off with 9/10 of whatever it is we've earned or whatever it is we've received. I've seen budgets from people within the church, and I've also seen people outside of the church talk about budgets. And it's pleasing to see that a number of those who are outside the church, who are secular in nature, talk about this idea that giving 10% of their income to charity or to a good cause is beneficial for that individual. It helps them to see that everything that we have comes to us from God, and it is a symbol of the appreciation we have to him for those blessings that he gives us. So just as we see that in the church, people outside the church see the benefit of this as well. And what you've got on the screen is how, in my experience, the vast majority of people approach their finances. And I'm talking about people who are in the church, who have lived it, who do the best they can. They receive their income, whatever it might be, make sure that they pay their living expenses, their rent, their mortgage, their food, their utilities. They pay their tithes because they strive to be honest in all that they do with the Lord. And then what's left over, they save. Now, my children are now grown up, and all but one have left our home. But during the time that they were young and I was a struggling father looking after my family by going to work while their mother stayed at home and looked after them, this was the pattern that I followed. And I'd get to step 1, step 2, step 3, but I never ever got to step 4. For the first few decades of our married life, savings was not one of the options we had. And so whenever we had something big that we needed to do, it was money that we had to borrow. I've learned over the years that there is a better order of things. It's a faith-driven approach, and this is what I'm proposing. The first step is, of course, you receive your income. But the second step is you pay your tithe straight away. You don't pay it next, you pay it first. You put the Lord first and pay your tithes. Then you put some money aside for yourself. Now that money could be $5 a pay cycle, or $10 a pay cycle, or more, but you put money aside for yourself. Now obviously this means that you've got to look at your finances and create a budget so that you know how much money you can afford to take away from your expenses, how much money you can afford to put aside for yourself. And then you pay your living expenses. And if there's maybe a fifth step, and if you find there's anything left over after that, then maybe put some more money aside or give yourself a treat. What I've discovered following this pattern is, for the first time in our married life, we began to save money. My income didn't change dramatically, but for some reason we were able to put money in the right order, and we were blessed for it. All I can suggest you do is try it. Now, what I used to do as well is, back in the day, we used checks. So I'd get paid, I'd write out my tithing check, I'd write out all my other utility checks, pay my bills, post them away, do whatever I had to do to pay them. But I would sometimes hold on to my tithing check because I knew that if I put it through, it might bounce because I spent all the money in my account. Then I'd wait for the next pay cycle and try to make up. But every now and then it just got too out of kilter, and I just not pay my tithing for one cycle, which was disappointing in many ways for myself and for my family. So I had to learn that following this pattern means literally to follow this pattern. I would receive my money or receive my wages. I would take out my tithing in cash and put that in my scriptures. And then I'd pay all the rest of my bills and everything else. That's how I made sure that I was a full tithe payer and how I remained a full tithe payer for the last few decades, just by following this simple approach. Any questions about that? Does it make sense? Yeah. But just, what I'd suggest you do is try it. Don't try it once and see if it works. Try it. Try it for a month or 2 or 3 and see how much money you save. You'd be surprised. P.B.J. Grant said this: the men and women who have been absolutely honest with God, who have paid their tithing, God has given them wisdom whereby they have been made able to utilize the remaining 9/10. And it has been of greater value to them, and they have accomplished more with it than they would have if they had not been honest with the Lord. The prophet of God made those statements. I'm comfortable that what he said is right. I certainly have experienced it. I'm one of 10 children. My father was not an educated man in terms of go to university or anything else. He just worked hard. When I came back off my mission and got married and started working in the bank, I would do my father's tax returns every year. And after about 4 years of doing his tax returns, I discovered that I was earning more than he was. I didn't think bankers were paid that much money, but I was earning more than my father after a lifetime of work. And that shook me a bit, but also made me wonder, how could he have brought up 10 children, sent us off to church college, sent us off to missions, send my mother to various parts of the world to help her with her health? How could he have done that? The only answer I can give you is my father was a full tithe payer. There weren't lots of miracles where people just dumped money on our laps. He just managed to be able to do what he had to do. So I know that it works. And I know that in any financial health plan that you've got, you must put the Lord first. With that in mind, there's another principle that I want to bring to your minds. Often when where we're having challenges, we get on our knees and we pray. And the more the challenges that we have, the harder we pray. That tends to be the pattern that we follow. When we don't have a challenge, our prayers become kind of light and a bit more plastic. But when we are in trouble, we tend to pray really, really hard and really intently to the Lord. Well, Oliver Cowdery did that, and the Lord gave him counsel that applies to you and I. He said this, as recorded in the Doctrine and Covenants: behold, you have not understood. You've supposed that I would give it unto you when you took no thought, save it was to ask me. And we do that. We just sit there and say, help me. Give me this. I need this. Verse 8, but behold, I say unto you that you must study it out in your mind. Then you must ask me. The pattern that Joseph Smith followed as a young 14-year-old boy was that he went to church after church after church to find out what they taught. Then he went and talked to our Father in heaven to ask him about which church to join. So he did a bit of homework first. For us, when it comes to finance, we need to do some homework. We need to think through, what is it that I need to understand to help me to be financially healthy, or to improve my financial health, irrespective of what state it's in. Which brings me to the second pattern. Stop incurring debt. Debt, and I work in banking. Banks live and die on debt. We live and die on helping people on giving people money to do things with it. What's important to understand, though, that banks now have regulations, have laws that have been passed to help us and force us, in fact, to be what is called responsible lenders. which means when we lend to people, this is not an advertising for bank, this is about the principles of understanding. When we lend to people, we need to understand that they have the ability to repay whatever the commitment is we've given them. If, for example, we overcommit somebody and allow them to borrow more money than they can repay, there's a very good likelihood that the bank will end up with a debt that they can't recover. Not because the person doesn't have assets, but because we've mistreated that individual. So banks are very careful now about providing debt to people. For you and I, though, the counsel that we've been given is to avoid debt to the extent that you can. Obviously, you can't avoid debt if you want to buy a house. And in some instances, you borrow money to get yourself into a car. I'll talk about that in a second as well. There are also times when we borrow money to go to university to get an education. And I can tell you that while I didn't go to university, or at least I didn't finish university, and I was fortunate to find myself in roles that paid me well, there are too many other people I know who far surpassed me in ability to generate income who went to university. So I know for sure that university is the way to go. Tertiary education is the way to go to increase your ability to generate income. If somebody is having financial challenges, they either look at their expenses and reduce them, or they find ways to generate more income, or both. But those are simple principles to keep in mind. The second thing I've got written up there is practice plastic surgery. That's to do with credit cards. I'm not suggesting that credit cards are bad. I'm suggesting that unless you know how to handle them well, get rid of them. Don't use them. Cut them up. In one of the earlier sessions, one of the attendees was saying that they use their credit card for all that they need to do, and then they pay it off. So they don't overcommit themselves. They just use their credit card to pay for everything, and then they repay it. I worked with a boss some years ago who was his credit card was linked to air points, I think it was. And so he would use his credit card for everything he could, repay it in full so he didn't incur any interest. But because he used it for things, he was accumulating air points, and I think he went on a couple of overseas trips just by accumulating the air points. One way or the other, just make sure that you know what you're doing when it comes to debt and whether you can manage it appropriately. So stop incurring debt. Typically, there is, I just put these things up to give you some context. Normally, if you get a personal loan, you can be charged anywhere from 12 to 20%. Credit cards from 6 to 25%. Hire purchase, 17 to 27%. You can see they're widely ranging. That last one, payday loans, there is a section in the bank that I work for now that was established directly in opposition to payday loans. Now, payday loans are loans that you can get. You can go and borrow a couple of $100 before payday, and then on payday you pay it back. But can you see the interest rates that are charged in this? 0.25 to 2.8% per day. That equates to 90 to 290% per year. It's horrendous. And what we have found is for every $100 that is advanced on a payday loan, the borrower pays $40 back. That's on average. That's a New Zealand average. Not a good way to spend money. So avoid those. Car loans. You notice how if you see advertising now, they say, if you've got $77, I can put you into a car. They don't say the car is worth this much, so much as this is the big piece. And I got a newspaper today, and I was just about to throw it away, and I had a look at the back of it, and sure enough, there were those ads that said, if you've got, in fact, I've got it right here. I won't show it to you because it shows the car dealership. If you can pay $107 every week, you can buy a Nissan X-Trail that's worth $20,995. $107 a week. Sounds good. When you read everything about it, however, your $20,000 car is going to cost you about $33,000. 33, 34. They tell you in the fine print that there is an establishment fee, there is an account fee that they charge every month, and the loan lasts for 6 years. So when you do the sums, you end up paying $13,000, $14,000 more for this car. They even have a warranty for 4 years. So you still got 2 years worth of repayments to make after the warranty is gone. What I'm pointing out to is that we need to study things out before we commit ourselves. We need to understand how much something costs. If you go in and you buy a phone and you're on a plan that costs you $150 a month or whatever the thing is, multiply it out and see how much money you're spending for that phone. Whether it be a phone or whatever it might be. Here's something I wanted to show you to illustrate understanding what it is when you want to borrow money. This is a mortgage, and I'm using a mortgage because it's big and it gives you big numbers just to illustrate the point. Here's a mortgage. Today you can get a 3% loan through most banks. If you borrowed that over a term of 15, 21, sorry, I haven't changed that, that should be 30 years, but close enough. 15, 21, or 30 years, you can get all of those loans from a bank. They will offer you all of those terms. The fortnightly repayments, though, you can see for the 15 years is $2,200, all the way down to 30 years is $1,358. So you might go, I'll go 30 years. That sounds like I can afford that. But on the right is the total interest you would pay for that loan. And the life of the loan for 15 years is $169,000 more dollars. For 30 years, it's $361,000 more dollars, or nearly $200,000 more in interest because you're paying less. So what's the lesson for that? I would recommend you look to borrow, if you're going to borrow for a house, figure out how much you can afford to pay and pay as much of that as you can. Don't try to pay the minimum amount. Although, in talking to Sister Gwilliam before, in the States, they have similar approaches, and you can take out a 30-year loan in the States, pay that lesser value, and if you pay one extra repayment a year, it reduces your overall loan down to 15 years. Does it make sense to everybody? Do your homework. Understand what it is that you're getting into. Let's look at number 3. Pay debt as soon as possible. This is a statement I found in True to the Faith, the booklet that we all have access to. When you have paid your debts and accumulated some savings, you will be prepared for financial storms that may come your way. You will have shelter for your family and peace in your heart. Pay debts as soon as possible. Let me help you to understand that statement. Debt reduction begins by looking at your budget and asking yourself, is there any more that I can pay towards my debt reduction? If there is, then you use that extra payment or extra value and you target your highest interest and pay that one with your extra money. Once that loan has been paid off, then you take the repayments for that loan plus that extra that you've got and you apply that to the next highest interest rate until that goes, and so on, always using that pool of repayment funds to repay all of your debts. So once one loan has been repaid, don't incur any more debt, but use that money to pay off something else. It kind of looks a bit like this. And this is a typical profile for many young people today. They borrowed a car, or money for a car, and they got 15,000 left to pay. They bought some clothes on hire purchase. They bought a laptop and a telephone or something. I'm trying to think what's expensive enough to warrant that. An Xbox, is it whatever the things. They bought stuff. Credit cards, they used the credit cards as spurge, went on holiday, did something, maybe use it for what they thought were necessities. But that's a typical profile of many people. I didn't go to extreme on the interest rates because they're typical interest rates that you can get. And the repayments, the $80 repayment is roughly 1.5% of the limit or of the exposure, but I thought just leave it as $80. So here's what the plan would be. You've got this thing understood, and you look at your budget and you discover I can pay another $100. You might waste $100 on buying junk food, as I discovered for myself. So you think, right, stop buying junk food. I'm going to put that $100 towards my debt. So you target, first of all, your $2,000 hire purchase debt that's being charged at 25%. So instead of paying $80, you're going to pay $180 until that's gone. Once that's gone, you take your $180 and you apply it to the next debt. Don't worry too much about the logic of it, but you can understand the principle behind it. You'd pay off that second hire purchase. Now, if that one has already been paid, then the $80 from that should be used to drive down your credit card. So very quickly, you'll have your hire purchase both taken care of, and you will have $260 plus the $80 that you're putting into your credit card to drive your credit card down. So $340 every pay cycle to reduce your credit card. And you're practicing discipline to not use your credit card again. It won't take that long to get that balance right down. During the first COVID lockdown of last year, I can't remember how long we were off, but we were off for about 3 months or something. We all worked from home. One of the guys at work was saying he saved so much money that he repaid his credit card because he wasn't paying for transport and he wasn't going into town and buying his lunch and he wasn't buying morning tea or afternoon tea. So he saved all that money. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. And I said, how does your wife feel about that? He said, oh, she's not too pleased because he went and bought himself some golf clubs. But the principle's the same. He drove it down. And he was paying enough money that, receiving enough money that it wasn't a big deal. But that's a principle that we can always follow. Then you would take your full repayment amount and put it on the car to get that down until the car is gone. Now, the piece about this that gives you peace is once you've paid those off, your income or you've now got, I keep forgetting the number, 700 and something odd dollars that you're not repaying a loan for. It doesn't mean you can go and spend 700 and something dollars. What it means is now you can save 700 and something dollars. Or maybe if you want to be kind to yourself, save 600 to put $160 aside as mad money to go and buy yourself a treat from time to time. But put some money aside. Because then, I'm going to introduce you to the last thought. Pay it forward. I've got not many, that's the only slide I've got. We're past masters at paying things back. I've been doing that my whole life. As my children got married, I'd borrow money and away they'd go, and they'd establish their family, and I'm still paying off. Well, I was still paying off the debt that I'd incurred. Not the smartest way to do things. It's taken me until my hair's a little bit grayer to figure out that there's wiser ways to do it, as in what we talked about now. And so if you pay your debts off, you've got enough money then to start saving up for those things that you want. Save up for the trip that you need. Don't put your trip on your plastic. Don't put it on your credit card and go and then come back. In fact, it's a very sobering exercise to sit down and look at your income and look at your expenses and identify of your expenses how much of it you do spend on repaying debt or on paying things back. Try paying it forward from time to time, and you'll be surprised how easy life becomes. Now, just a point. I presented this to a group earlier, I think it might have been last week, and it's come up a couple of times where people have said, you know, I was doing really, really good. I had a budget, I was following it, and then someone in the family died, and every family in my family had to pay $500. And that blew my budget, so I was back to being out of balance, spending more money than I earned. We need to factor in all aspects of our lives, not just, yes, I'm going to have to eat, so put some money aside for food. Yes, I'm going to have to put a roof over my head, put money aside for rent or for a mortgage. Yes, I'm going to have to pay rates, I'm going to have to pay power, I'm going to have to pay water, whatever else we have to pay for utilities. But also, we look to say, and I expect that there'll be members of my family who will pass away. And if you are from a culture where that generates a feeling of, or a desire to, or an obligation to provide financial support to help that family deal with the challenges of it, factor that into your savings. Put aside some money. You can either call it you want to be morbid, your funeral money, but call it your emergency funds. You can't predict when people will die, but you can predict that people will die, not the when. So put some money aside. There was a lady in one of the previous sessions who spoke about the fact that her siblings, she's a grown lady towards the latter half of her life, but her and her siblings, they put aside a certain amount of money every week. She didn't say how much, but it said it was only a small amount. And they accumulate those funds so that whenever they have a funeral or something of that nature that they need to contribute to, it doesn't come out of their pay packet, it comes out of this fund that they put aside. So in your planning, in your budgeting, in all that you do, think about how you can, what sort of challenges you'll have in the future. Apologise for the background noise. I live in South Auckland and we have the police helicopter fly around quite often. It's loitering outside somewhere. So that fourth principle, pay it forward. So we've talked about four things in this path to financial health. Put first things first. Pay the Lord. Exercise faith in him so that he will open the windows of heaven to bless you and bless your family. Some say, how can I afford to pay tithing? And the response to that is, how can I afford not to? We can do more with the 9/10 that we have left than we could ever do with the 10/10. And the logic doesn't work, but faith works. Stop incurring debt. If you really want to be financially healthy, keep debt to the necessities. And be careful you don't convince yourself that that new car is a necessity. A good friend of mine, and I've known him for many, many years, he drives very modest cars. He does so because he only ever buys them for cash. So he spends $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. I think that the most he spent on a car was $9,000 until just recently. And he came pick me up. And he was in a very nice looking car. And he said, yep, it's his new car. He finally bought something that was worth more than, well, then he called it than the old dungers that he was driving in the past. But again, he paid cash for it. On that cash piece for cars, I can't remember if I even said anything about it, but I did a little bit of, I had a look at the numbers that I told you about before with cars, and if you go on their finances, the financing that they offer equates to about a 20% loan. That's really high for a car. If you save up the money and you walk in and you buy a car for $10,000, that's a whole lot better than not saving up any money and spending $17,000 for the same car. So think it through. Stop incurring debt, or be wise with the debt that you incur. Pay off your debt as soon as you can so that you reduce the interest margin or interest component of your repayments. And then once you've done that, you have the luxury or the benefit or the wisdom to be able to start paying things forward. What do I need? Let's put some money aside now and then pay for it. Are there any questions about this? If there's one thing though that I want you to remember from this presentation, it's not the numbers, it's not the everything else, it's this simple principle. This is the pattern that starts it all. And it's the pattern that if you apply in your lives will help you in everything. I don't even have to make the promise. The Lord's already made the promise. Identify the blessings you want. What are they? Write them down. And then start looking for the laws that are attached to those blessings. If you want to buy a house, you've got to save. If you want to save, you've got to earn more than you spend. It's really simple. There's no rocket science to that. So put aside money. If you want good health, then watch what you eat. Listen to doctors and others who are specialists in those areas to see, and listen to all the voices. You get some voices that say, do this kind of exercise, and some do that. I'm into finding out. I don't do exercises too easily, but I'm into finding out more about weight and loss and all that sort of stuff at the moment. But there's so many voices. But do your homework and find out about it and find out the law that you need to live to achieve so that you can get the blessing that you want to receive. And then live it. Just live it. And then leave the rest to the Lord. I can promise you that it works. But in fact, but I want to finish with this thought. And then maybe if there's any questions, we can talk them through. The Lord made this simple promise, I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. But when you do not what I say, you have no promise. And what I have learned from experience is sometimes in the tender mercies that are provided to us, the Lord will still bless us, even though we may not have lived the law. We can also bind the Lord to bless us if we do live the law. And that's my accumulated wisdom after all these years of listening to people's challenges and trying to help them to sort out their financial difficulties. Thank you all for your time. If there's nothing else, have a wonderful day.